Hi, James.
Hi, Dinara.
Guys, we continue with Russian state exam, and we have a quite big article here.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this one is a little bit different from the previous question. This one is a classic reading comprehension article. So where you have to read the article, and then you read the article, and then you have a series of multiple choice questions to answer afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So my advice on this one is read it in full and then have a look at each question. And as obviously they should be in order. So as you move down the questions, you can, so when you're on the first question, for example, reread the first paragraph of the first couple paragraphs, and you should have your answer there. So that there should be, that is what I would recommend. Do you have any other tips for reading comprehension?
I remember when I was preparing for IELTS exam, there was advice that to skim first quickly, read the article, and then quickly read questions, and then read the article more attentively.
Yeah, I think that is also a good way to do it. Absolutely. So I think what we'll do here is I'm going to read the article out loud for you, and then we're going to have a look at the answer. We're going to work out the answers together. So, iGeneration, teenagers affected by phones. One day last summer around noon, I called Athena, a 13-year-old who lives in Houston, Texas. She answered her phone. She has had an iPhone since she was 11, sounding as if she'd just woken up. We chatted about her favorite songs and TV shows, and I asked her what she likes to do with her friends. We go to the mall, she said. Do your parents drop you off? I asked, recalling my own middle school days in the 1980s, when I'd enjoy a few parent-free hours shopping with my friends. No, I go with my family, she replied. We'll go with my mom and brothers and walk a little behind them. I just have to tell my mom where we are going. I have to check in every hour or every 30 minutes. Those mall trips are infrequent, about once a month. More often, Athena and her friends spend time together on their phones, unchaperoned. Unlike the teens of my generation, who might have spent an evening tying up the family landline with gossip, they talk on Snapchat, a smartphone app that allows users to send pictures and videos that quickly disappear. They make sure to keep up their snap streaks, which show how many days in a row they have Snapchatted with each other. She told me that she had spent most of the summer hanging out alone in her room with her phone. That is just the way her generation is, she said. We didn't know any life other than with iPads or iPhones. I think we like our phones more than we like actual people. Some generational changes are positive, some are negative, and many are both. More comfortable in their bedrooms than in a car or at a party, today's teens are physically safer than teens have ever been. They are markedly less likely to get into a car accident, and having less of a taste for alcohol than their predecessors are less susceptible to drinking's attendant ills. Psychologically, however, they are more vulnerable than millennials were. Rates of teen depression and suicide have skyrocketed since 2011. It is not an exaggeration to describe iGen as being on the brink of the worst mental health crisis in decades. Much of this deterioration can be traced to their phones. However, in my conversation with teens, I saw hopeful signs that kids themselves are beginning to link some of their troubles to their ever-present phone. Athena told me that when she does spend time with her friends in person, they are often looking at their device instead of at her. I'm trying to talk to them about something and they don't actually look at my face, she said. They're looking at their phone or they're looking at their Apple Watch. What does that feel like when you're trying to talk to somebody face to face and they're not looking at you? They're not looking at you, I asked. It kind of hurts, she said. It hurts. I know my parents' generation didn't do that. I could be talking about something super important to me and they wouldn't even be listening. Once, she told me, she was hanging out with a friend who was texting her boyfriend. I was trying to talk to her about my family and what was going on, and she was like, yeah, whatever. So I took her phone out of her hands and I threw it at the wall. Though it is aggressive behavior that I don't support, on the other hand, it is a step towards a life with limited phone use. So if I were going to give advice for a happy adolescence, it would be straightforward. Put down the phone, turn off the laptop, and do something, anything, that does not involve a screen. Okay, excellent. So
again, this article is not difficult. There are several only phrases I think maybe students can not understand. Myself, I don't know one word in this article. And could you, I don't know, this unchaperoned?
Unchaperoned, that means, as in not, so if unchaperoned, it means on your own. So without, say, parental or teacher supervision, for example.
Mm-hmm. So you're not watched, let's say, right?
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Another exaggeration. Can you explain to our students what exaggeration means? Maybe they cannot know.
Yeah, so an exaggeration is when you say, for example, you talk about something and then you suggest it is far bigger or smaller than it actually is. So if you talk about, so for example, if you say, I don't know, so you went on a long bus trip and you said, oh, it took 25 hours when actually it was an hour and a half. So that's an example of an exaggeration.
Nice, cool. Thank you. And another word I didn't understand myself. Can you explain, please, vulnerable, what it means to our students?
Vulnerable. If you are vulnerable, then it means that you're in a greater, you're at a greater likelihood of being in danger. So vulnerable. It's like so a weak spot, basically, something that you're more likely to be in danger of. That's what vulnerable means. So if you're, so you might describe someone, for example, as if you talk about, say, a sports star. Let's look at tennis players. They are vulnerable to injuries with their elbow, because they're constantly doing the same motion of hitting things with their arms. So in this context, they are more vulnerable than millennials were. So they're more likely to be in danger psychologically than millennials were. So the previous generation were. That's what it means.
I see. And the word, this word I don't know myself, susceptible.
Yeah, that's very similar as well. To vulnerable. So susceptible means that you're likely to experience something again. So in the context, so if you are susceptible to something, then you're likely to experience it, or you have a strong chance of experiencing it. It's not guaranteed. It's just the likelihood is higher.
And deterioration.
Deterioration, that means getting worse.
Oh, cool. This word is super new for me and is useful. So this article, do you consider it B1 or B2?
Yeah, I would say it's B1, so I would say it's B1. So it has some complex vocabulary in there, but so it's more complex than the previous one. But yeah, I would go for B1. So it's in
Thank you. So other words I think are easy to understand, guys. And if you maybe we did not mention something you didn't understand, write down about these things in the comments and help each other to understand. So and I really like that it tells a lot about teacher when teacher can simplify academic English to oral English. So like you do, it's much better, of course, than just to give translation.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that's often the way that there's very often a synonym, so that means something very similar, but it's simpler. And that's the easiest way to describe it. Because if it's a translation, you think about that word as having always the same context. So, but obviously languages can be a bit different, that they can be different. They can use something that, so you'll get translations that don't work in every context. That's why it's better to think of it on its own logic and merits, if that makes sense.
I see. Thank you.
So here, yeah, exactly. And I think this is a really topical, debate at the moment when it comes to smartphones and how addictive they are. Yeah, it's an interesting article. Let's have a look at some of the answers then. So according to the author, in her childhood, she used to, so I think, let's have a look back at the first, the first couple paragraphs. So she talked about going shopping with her friends in the 1980s, when I'd enjoy a few parent-free hours shopping with my friends. So she talks about, so going, doing the shopping with her friends. That's what she mentioned. And she did also mention that she just has to tell her mum where we were going. So I have to check in every hour or every 30 minutes. So, but it's not so much about that. It's more just that's part of going to the shops with her friends. So, so I would go with that.
Answer is 4, right?
Yeah, I would go for that. Which of the following does Athena do monthly? So goes to the mall with her family, uses Snapchat, not the Snapchat.
Yeah, strange. Yeah.
So it sounds a bit weird. Uses the Snapchat. There are many.
Like the Dinara or the James.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds like saying that. Exactly. Well, I mean, if you have a list of Dinaras or Jameses that you're discussing, then obviously, oh no, that's the James I was talking about. That's the Dinara. So if you have a list of them, but exactly. So as in the Snapchat, invites friends to her place, changes her iPhone. So let's have a look back. So what she does monthly. So that's the key word, what Athena does monthly. Those mall trips are, so she says that she goes with her family. Okay. And she says that those mall trips, she says that she goes with her family. And then she talks about having to check in on them every 30 minutes. Okay, so she goes to the mall with her family once a month. For Athena's peers, so that's number 1, she goes to the mall with her family. For Athena's peers, spending time alone in their rooms seems natural, soothing, awkward, or difficult. So I think it's going to be natural, if I remember correctly.
I don't know the word peers. What is it?
So peers means people in your group. So so your peers, if you are say 14 or 15, your peers are other young teenagers, for example. So we can use it in many contexts. So for example, this is quite specific, but so when it comes to jury trials, so where you are on trial at a court, then you are tried by your peers. So the jury is a selection of people from the public who will try you, and that's another example of using of your peers. So it means people in so people like you. Exactly. So, but in this context, so it means her group. So young teenagers, for example. Yeah, so let's have a look. So is it natural? So I think it is natural. Spending time alone seems natural. So she told me she had spent most of the summer hanging out alone in her room with her phone. So she said that's just the way that, it sounds like she doesn't use the word natural, but that's how she just describes it. That's just the way it is. So she says that is just the way her generation is. So in that way, we can talk about natural, so it seems natural because it's the way that people do things. Which of the following is not true about iGen teenagers, according to the author? So most of them feel extremely unhappy. It is easy to hurt them psychologically. They prefer loneliness to company, or they have more physical health problems. Now the one that it says here, if you look, more comfortable in their bedrooms than in a car or at a party, today's teens are physically safer than teens have ever been. So they're physically safer. So I would go in that, and also they don't drink as much. So I would go for number, but it does say that many of the rates of depression are very high, and as in they. So it does say that their rates of depression are high and they're vulnerable psychologically. So I would go for they have more physical health problems, because physical health is related to the body, it's not the mind. So, and they say that they've physically safer than teens have ever been.
So it is not true.
Yeah, that one's not true. Exactly. That, I know my parents' generation didn't do that, refers to, I think it was, so the others are really, really general, behaving in a mean way. That's always happened. Discussing their problems. So, that happens to a greater or lesser extent the whole time, every generation. So I know, so what does that feel like when you're trying to talk to somebody face to face and they're not looking at you? So being glued to their phones, I would go for. So it could technically also be listening attentively, no, they did listen attentively though, their parents. So that's what they're suggesting. So I would go for being glued to their phones.
So her parents' generation didn't do that.
Exactly. So that they were glued to their phones. Yeah. So her parents' generation weren't like that, because a landline in the 1980s or whatever, or it wasn't that exciting. So that's why. So the fact that Athena threw away her friend's phone proves that smartphones can cause mental health problems. Teenagers know the problems caused by phones. They make them more aggressive, or her friend thought she was doing the right thing. So it says here, I was trying to talk about her. So I took the phone and threw it at a wall. So I think it shows teenagers know the problems caused by by phones. So it doesn't suggest she personally has any mental health problems or what her friend thought of that, but it shows that she realizes there's a problem with it stopping people from focusing. So what does the author suggest in her article? Phone use by young people should be limited. Smartphones cause violent behavior. Smartphones are not safe. That there are good and bad sides in using smartphones. So it doesn't specifically talk about any good sides to smartphones. So I would go with, if I were going to give advice for a happy adolescence, it would be straightforward. Put down the phone, So she's, phone use by young people should be limited, is what she's suggesting.
Yeah. Adolescence means teenagers, right?
Yeah, that's right. So that's.
So I have.
It's specifically that it's generally a synonym with teenage years. It's basically the middle stage between being a child and an adult. So as in it's between the two. So adolescence is when you're growing into an adult.
James, are you addicted to your phone?
So I would say I use it more than I should, but I am cognizant. So I'm aware of how dangerous phones can be. So I often, I think what I'm worst at doing when it comes to the phone is looking at, if you wake up early in the morning, looking at the phone. So I don't tend to look at it much late at night, but when I wake up in the morning, instead of trying to get back to sleep, I might have a look at the news or have a look at, as in messages, or have a look at, so have a look at something else. So I do certain steps. So I switch my phone onto silent a lot of the time. That's good. I also, on days where I don't need to answer that day, anything important that day, like a day off, I might place it in another room for several hours. So I do sometimes consciously make myself place the phone away from me.
Cool.
So because I do find that sometimes it can also be annoying, because when you're trying to watch a good series and then your brain isn't good at it, you think you can multitask, but what you're actually doing is you're focusing on one thing and then moving to another thing, as in brain's going back and forth the whole time. So when I'm trying to watch stuff or trying to talk to people, I always place it away. I never stare at my phone and talk to someone for 4 hours. So I definitely wouldn't do that. How about you?
I'm not addictive to phone at all. I use it only as a tool. And what helps me to do that, in our childhood, we did not have TV at home.
Yes.
It was my parents' choice. They wanted us to read books. So I'm very grateful that they did it.
Yes.
Obviously, when I was a teenager, I didn't understand it. I was a bit confused because of that. I did not know any, let's say, famous things, shows or something. I found out about Netflix several years ago because my teenage students, they told me like, "Oh, don't you know about Netflix?" And I was like, "Netflix? What is it?" Yeah, and so thankfully to my childhood, it's easy for me to concentrate on my aims, and so I'm quite an ambitious person, and I have no time for spending time on social media.
Yeah, but I do very rarely use social media as well. So so I don't. So I very rarely check social media because I know that that is a particularly bad area. So,
bad area.
Well, I mean, it can be interesting. Of course, it can be interesting. You can find funny, So I would say the only areas that really do consume some of my areas are YouTube, as in it's got interesting videos on there. You can watch videos about lots of different topics, and the news. So those are the two things that I tend to read or watch the most, or obviously messaging people. But that's it basically. That's it basically for me. But but speaking of which, so a really good documentary on this topic is The Social Dilemma. So it talks about why smartphones are so addictive, and the creepy part is that it's a design feature.
Please, could you send the link to this documentary? We will share it. We'll share it with our students and them to be aware what's happening. James, thank you. I'm myself, first of all, grateful for your help. It's big what we're doing. Yeah. And guys, as usual, we invite you to our social media. It sounds obviously like, so
that's
our
ironic
social media
afterwards, but it has its positive sides, and it's good for spreading information, as in getting awareness, etc. So it has its plus things.
On our social media, you'll be able to take part, to be able to win even 1 month of classes at our school. We are waiting for you, guys, and we'll be happy if you share. So please, not just please share these videos with everyone who is preparing for the Russian state exam. It's a nightmare, we know. Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.